"Watch where you're going, old man." The voice boomed off the sterile, polished linoleum of the base hallway, echoing louder than the slap of boots on the floor. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Corporal Miller, a young Marine with a high and tight haircut that seemed to pull his eyebrows upward in a perpetual state of arrogance, stood with his chest puffed out. He brushed imaginary dust off the sleeve of his combat utility uniform, the pixelated Marpat woodland camouflage blending sharply with the sterile beige of the administrative wing. Next to him, two other Marines, Lance Corporal Davis and Private First Class Ortiz, snickered, covering their mouths but making no real effort to hide their amusement. On the floor, a cane clattered, spinning in a slow circle before coming to a rest against the baseboard. A folder of papers had spilled open, white sheets fanning out across the wax-polished tiles like a surrendered flag. Jeffrey Warner stood there, slightly swayed by the impact but still upright. He was 82 years old, though his posture suggested a man who had spent decades carrying heavy things, both physical and metaphysical. He wore a simple, short-sleeved royal blue button-down shirt, neatly pressed but visibly worn at the collar, and a pair of gray slacks that broke just above orthopedic black shoes. He looked like a visitor who had taken a wrong turn on the way to the pharmacy, or perhaps a grandfather looking for the base exchange to buy a birthday card. He didn't apologize. He didn't cower. He simply looked at the young corporal. Jeffrey's eyes were a faded, watery blue, set deep within a roadmap of wrinkles that carved through his weather-beaten skin. He blinked once, slowly, his gaze shifting from the Marine's aggressive stance to the scattered papers on the floor. "You hear me?" Miller stepped closer, invading Jeffrey's personal space. The corporal was tall, broad-shouldered and high on the adrenaline of a morning PT session and the invincible feeling of being 22 in a uniform that commanded respect. "I said watch it. This is an active corridor, not a nursing home promenade." Davis laughed again, a sharp barking sound. "He probably forgot where he is, Miller. Look at him. Probably looking for the chow hall to get some soft mash." Jeffrey slowly bent his knees. The movement was stiff, accompanied by the dry pop of a joint, but controlled. He reached for the closest piece of paper. It was a standard form, innocuous and boring, but his hand hovered over it for a second. His knuckles were swollen with arthritis, the skin thin like parchment paper. "I am gathering my things," Jeffrey said. His voice was gravelly low and possessed a texture that sounded like tires rolling over crushed rock. It wasn't loud, but it carried a strange resonance that cut under the hum of the fluorescent lights. Miller rolled his eyes and kicked the tip of Jeffrey's cane, sending it sliding another 3 feet down the hall. "Move it faster, then. We've got places to be. You're blocking traffic." The hallway wasn't crowded. In fact, aside from the 3 Marines and the old man in the blue shirt, it was currently empty. The traffic was a fabrication, a power play designed to assert dominance over someone who looked weak. It was the kind of casual cruelty born of boredom and a misplaced sense of superiority. Jeffrey stopped reaching for the paper. He straightened up, abandoning the document on the floor. He looked at the cane, then back at Miller. For a second, the air in the hallway changed. It grew heavy. Jeffrey's stillness wasn't the paralysis of fear. It was the stillness of a predator waiting for the wind to shift. "You kicked my cane," Jeffrey stated. "It wasn't a question. I moved a tripping hazard," Miller corrected with a smirk, crossing his arms over his chest. The Marpat pattern on his uniform seemed to vibrate under the harsh lights. "You got a pass to be in this wing, sir. This is the command element. Civilians usually stick to the visitor center near the gate." "I have an appointment," Jeffrey said quietly. "An appointment," Miller mocked, looking at his friends. "With who? The janitor? You looking for a job mopping these floors? Because honestly, you look like you'd struggle lifting the bucket." Ortiz chimed in. "Hey, easy, Corp. Maybe he's somebody's grandpa." "If he's somebody's grandpa, they should keep him on a leash," Miller snapped, his patience evaporating. He stepped forward again, effectively looming over Jeffrey. "Let me see some ID. Now, before I call the MPs and have them drag you out for trespassing." Jeffrey didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't pat his pockets. He just stood there, his hands hanging loosely by his sides. The royal blue shirt seemed almost vibrant against the dull background, a splash of color in a world of camouflage and khaki. On the collar of that blue shirt, unseen by the Marines who were too busy looking at the old man's shoes and his wrinkles, was a tiny pin. It was no larger than a dime, black enamel with a gold rim. It caught the light briefly as Jeffrey shifted his weight, a flash of gold that vanished as quickly as it appeared. For a split second, Jeffrey's mind drifted. The polished hallway dissolved. The smell of floor wax was replaced by the copper tang of blood and the sulfur stench of burning cordite. He felt the humidity of a jungle thick enough to drink, and the weight of a radio handset in his grip. He heard the scream of incoming mortars, not the jeers of young men. He remembered the feeling of mud, slick and deep, and the way the sky lit up when the air support finally arrived. He remembered the faces of boys younger than Miller, boys who didn't smirk, boys who died holding pictures of their mothers. The memory lasted less than a heartbeat, a flash echo of a life lived in the red zone. It grounded him. It reminded him that true strength didn't need to shout. "I asked for ID," Miller barked, snapping his fingers in front of Jeffrey's face. "I don't think you want to do that, son," Jeffrey said. His tone had shifted. The gravel was still there, but now there was steel underneath it. Miller's face went red. The term son was the trigger. "I am a corporal in the United States Marine Corps, and you are a confused civilian in a restricted area. I am not your son. Now get against the wall, hands where I can see them." At the far end of the hallway, a door clicked open. A young woman, a specialist in the Army wearing standard OCPs, stepped out carrying a tray of coffees. She froze. She saw the three Marines towering over the elderly man in the blue shirt. She saw the cane on the floor. She saw the papers scattered. Her eyes locked onto the old man's face. She squinted. She had been working in the historical archives for the past 6 months, digitizing records from the Vietnam era and the conflicts that followed. She knew faces. She knew citations. The color drained from her face so fast it looked like she might faint. The coffee tray wobbled in her hands. She didn't know the man personally. Nobody really saw him in person anymore, but she knew the face. The jawline was softer now, the hair white instead of raven black, but the eyes were the same. The eyes of the man in the photo hanging in the quietest, most sacred part of the base museum. She dropped the coffee tray. The crash was deafening. 4 cardboard cups exploded, sending hot brown liquid splashing across the pristine floor. The sound broke the standoff. Miller and the other Marines jumped, spinning around to see the source of the noise. "What the hell is wrong with everyone today?" Miller shouted, throwing his hands up. "Is it be incompetent day and nobody told me?" But the specialist didn't apologize. She didn't even look at the mess she had made. She was backing up, fumbling for the phone clipped to her belt. Her fingers shook as she dialed a number that wasn't listed in the general directory. It was a direct line to the aide-de-camp for the base commander. "Pick up, pick up, pick up," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on Jeffrey Warner. Miller turned back to Jeffrey, his anger now compounded by the spill. "Great, now look what you caused. You're a distraction. You're a liability." He reached out and grabbed Jeffrey's arm. The grip was tight, fingers digging into the loose fabric of the blue shirt. "That's it. We're going to the guard shack." Jeffrey looked at the hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. He didn't strike back. He merely looked at the fingers, then up at Miller's eyes. "Unhand me," Jeffrey said. It was a command, quiet and absolute. "Or what?" Miller sneered. "You gonna hit me with your cane? Oh wait, you can't reach it." Inside the secured conference room 3 floors up, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of filtered air and serious decisions. A heavy oak table dominated the room. Around it sat men who moved armies. General Vance sat at the head. He was a large man wearing the Army Service greens, the iconic pinks and greens that harkened back to the Second World War. The uniform was impeccable, the jacket a deep olive, the trousers a contrasting pinkish taupe, the belt perfectly aligned. Ribbons stacked high on his chest told a story of 30 years of service. To his right sat General Sterling, leaner, sharper, his service greens tailored to a razor's edge. To the left was General Holloway, a woman with a gaze that could cut glass, her own uniform bearing the stars of a major general. They were discussing budget allocations for joint training exercises when the red phone on the side table buzzed. It wasn't a ring, it was a harsh, insistent hum that meant priority immediate. General Vance frowned. He stopped mid-sentence. He picked up the receiver. "Vance." He listened for 3 seconds. His eyes, previously tired and bored with spreadsheets, suddenly widened. The pupils contracted. He sat up straight, the leather of his chair creaking loudly in the silent room. "Repeat that," Vance said, his voice dropping an octave. "Where?" Sterling and Holloway watched him. They knew Vance. They had served with him in the desert. They had never seen him look frightened. "Hallway C, the admin wing." Vance listened again. "And you're sure? You are absolutely sure it's him?" Vance slammed the phone down. He didn't speak. He stood up so abruptly his heavy chair tipped backward and crashed to the floor. "Vance," Sterling asked, rising halfway. "What is it? Is it a threat condition?" "Worse," Vance said. He was already moving toward the door, grabbing his service cap from the table. "Warner is in the building." General Holloway gasped. "Jeffrey Warner. The ghost. "He's in hallway C," Vance said, opening the door and striding out, his pace nearly a run. "And according to the archivist who just called, 3 Marines are currently physically harassing him." The silence that followed lasted a fraction of a second before Sterling and Holloway were moving. They didn't walk. They didn't march. They scrambled. The protocol of seniority vanished. They were just 3 soldiers rushing to prevent a catastrophe of historic proportions. "Lock it down," Vance yelled to his aide in the outer office as he sprinted past. "Lock down the entire admin wing. Nobody enters, nobody leaves. Get the MPs to stand down. I want a clear path." "Sir?" the aide stammered. "Do it," Vance roared, his voice shaking the framed pictures on the wall. Back in the hallway, the situation had deteriorated. Miller had twisted Jeffrey's arm behind his back, forcing the old man to lean forward. Jeffrey gasped, a sharp intake of breath through clenched teeth, but he didn't cry out. The pain in his shoulder was sharp, old shrapnel wounds flaring up under the pressure, but he had endured worse, much worse. "You're resisting," Miller lied, playing to the imaginary camera in his head. "Stop resisting." "I am not resisting," Jeffrey gritted out. "Let him go, Miller. He's old," Ortiz said, looking nervous now. The spilled coffee was spreading toward them, a dark stain on the floor. "This doesn't feel right." "Shut up, Ortiz," Miller snapped. He refused to identify. "He's trespassing. He's belligerent. We're taking him in." Miller shoved Jeffrey forward. Jeffrey stumbled, his bad knee buckling. He went down to one knee, his hand slapping the wet floor to catch himself. The coffee soaked into the knee of his gray slacks. Miller laughed. It was a short, victorious sound. "Look at that. Can't even stand up. That is enough." The voice didn't come from the hallway. It came from the stairwell door at the far end, which banged open with enough force to dent the plaster wall. Miller turned, annoyed. "I told you this is a restricted—" The words died in his throat. It wasn't an MP. It wasn't a janitor. It was a wall of olive and taupe. General Vance was in the lead, his face a mask of fury so intense it looked painful. Behind him were Generals Sterling and Holloway. 3 stars, 2 stars, 2 stars, 7 stars total, moving down the hallway with the kinetic energy of a freight train. Behind them, the hallway filled with a dozen armed soldiers, the cavalry, their weapons at the low ready, but they weren't looking at the generals. They were looking at the Marines. Miller dropped Jeffrey's arm. It was an instinctive reaction, like dropping a hot coal. His brain couldn't process what he was seeing. Generals didn't run. Generals didn't come to hallway C. And generals certainly didn't look like they were about to commit murder. "Attention," Davis screamed, his voice cracking. He snapped to the position of attention so fast his heels clicked like a gunshot. Ortiz followed suit, trembling. Miller, pale and shaking, tried to snap to attention, but his feet felt like lead. He stood rigid, his eyes wide, watching the approaching storm. General Vance didn't stop until he was 6 inches from Miller's face. The general was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from rage. He ignored the Marine completely for a second, looking down at Jeffrey Warner. Vance dropped to his knees. He didn't care about the coffee spill. He didn't care about the pristine crease of his Army Service green trousers. He knelt in the brown puddle, ignoring the wetness seeping into the fabric. "Sir," Vance said, his voice trembling with an emotion that Miller couldn't identify. It sounded like reverence. Vance reached out, his hands gentle, hovering near Jeffrey. "Sir, are you injured? Did they hurt you?" Jeffrey looked up. He adjusted his glasses, which had slipped down his nose. He looked at Vance, then a slow, tired smile touched his lips. "Hello, Robert," Jeffrey said. "I see you finally got that 3rd star." Miller felt the blood leave his head. "Robert?" He called a Lieutenant General Robert. General Sterling and General Holloway were there too, crowding around. Sterling, a man known for his icy demeanor, looked stricken. He reached down and picked up the cane from where Miller had kicked it. He wiped it off with his own sleeve, his general officer's sleeve, and held it out with 2 hands, head bowed. "Your cane, Sergeant Major," Sterling whispered. "Sergeant Major." The rank hung in the air, but Miller knew the rank structure. A sergeant major was enlisted. High enlisted, yes, but still, why were generals kneeling? Jeffrey took the cane. He used it to push himself up. Vance and Holloway immediately gripped his elbows, hoisting him gently to his feet. They treated him like he was made of glass, or perhaps something far more precious, like he was the Holy Grail. Once Jeffrey was standing, Vance stood up. He turned slowly to face Corporal Miller. The transition from gentle concern to cold, annihilating fury was instantaneous. Vance didn't yell. The hallway was deadly silent. The soldiers in the back held their breath. "Corporal," Vance said. The word sounded like a curse. "Sir," Miller squeaked. "Do you know who this man is?" Vance asked softly. "No, sir. He had no ID. He was loitering." "Loitering," Vance repeated. He stepped closer. "This man is Command Sergeant Major Jeffrey Warner." Miller blinked. The name sounded vaguely familiar, like something from a textbook he hadn't read. "You don't know the name," Vance observed, his voice dripping with disgust. "That is a failure of your leadership and a failure of your education, but let me educate you right now." Vance pointed a trembling finger at the royal blue shirt. "This man," Vance said, his voice rising, projecting down the hall so every soul could hear, held the perimeter at Firebase Delta for 3 days, alone, after his entire platoon was incapacitated. Miller's eyes flicked to Jeffrey. The old man was brushing lint off his sleeve, looking embarrassed by the attention. "He is the recipient of the Medal of Honor," Vance continued, the volume climbing. "He has 3 silver stars, 2 purple hearts. He is the founding father of the reconnaissance school you Marines are so proud of. He wrote the book on jungle survival that you carried in your pocket during boot camp." General Holloway stepped forward, her face tight. "He isn't just a veteran, Corporal. He is the veteran. He is the reason half the tactics you use exist. He is the reason General Vance, General Sterling, and myself are alive today. He trained us. He led us." Miller felt like the floor was opening up. He had shoved a Medal of Honor recipient. He had mocked the man who wrote the manual. "And you," Vance hissed, leaning in so close his breath fogged Miller's vision. "You hit him. You laughed at him. You kicked his cane." I didn't know," Miller stammered. Tears of panic were pricking his eyes. "He was just wearing a blue shirt." You thought he was weak," Jeffrey spoke up. The generals went silent instantly. They stepped back, giving the floor to the man in the blue shirt. Jeffrey stepped forward, leaning on his cane. The limp was pronounced now. He stopped in front of Miller. He wasn't tall, but in that moment, he seemed to tower over the Marine. "You thought I was weak because I am old," Jeffrey said softly. "You thought I was irrelevant because I was not in uniform. You judged the book by a cover that has been worn down by time." Jeffrey reached up and tapped the Marpat camouflage on Miller's chest. "This uniform," Jeffrey said, "is not a license to be a bully. It is a weight. It is a promise. You serve the people, all the people, the confused old men, the grandfathers, the janitors. When you put this on, you lose the right to be arrogant. You gain the responsibility to be humble." He paused, looking at the other 2 Marines. They were staring at their boots, ashamed. "I came here today," Jeffrey said, addressing the group, "because General Vance invited me to speak to the new officer candidates about leadership, about character." He looked back at Miller. "It seems I have my first case study." Vance stepped back in. MPs, 2 military police officers materialized from the crowd at the end of the hall. "Take these 3 into custody," Vance ordered. "Charge them with conduct unbecoming, assault, and disrespect to a superior commissioned officer." "Sir," Miller panicked. It was a terrifying, wolfish smile. "Oh, I forgot to mention, upon his retirement 20 years ago, Jeffrey Warner was brevetted to the honorary rank of Brigadier General by the President of the United States. You just assaulted a general officer's son." Miller's knees gave out. He didn't faint, but he sagged, caught by the MPs who grabbed him roughly. As the Marines were dragged away, stripped of their dignity and facing the end of their careers, the hallway remained silent. General Vance turned back to Jeffrey. He dusted off the shoulder of the blue shirt where Miller's dirty hand had grabbed him. "I am so sorry, Jeffrey," Vance said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have sent an escort to the gate. I never thought." "It's all right, Robert," Jeffrey said, patting the general's hand. "It was educational. Besides, I haven't seen you move that fast since the Tet Offensive." Vance let out a short, relieved laugh. He turned to the crowd of soldiers and staff who had gathered, witnessing the scene. "Attention to orders," Vance shouted. The entire hallway, 50 people deep, snapped to attention. "Present, arms," 50 hands snapped up in a salute. It wasn't a ceremonial salute for a parade. It was a salute of deep, guttural respect. It was a salute for the man who had walked through hell so they wouldn't have. Jeffrey Warner stood there in his blue shirt, his gray slacks stained with coffee, holding his battered cane. He looked at the young faces. He looked at the generals who were once his boys. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he raised his hand to his brow. He returned the salute. For a moment, the flash echo returned. He wasn't in a hallway. He was on a muddy landing zone, watching a chopper lift off, carrying the wounded to safety while he stayed behind to hold the line. He felt the weight of the M16. He felt the fear, but mostly he felt the love for the men beside him. The memory faded. He was back in the hallway. "At ease," Jeffrey said. Vance offered his arm. "Come on, sir. Let's get you a fresh coffee. And maybe a dry pair of pants. I have a spare set of greens in my office, though they might be a bit big on you." Jeffrey chuckled. "I think I'll stick to the blue shirt, Robert. It seems to be the only thing that keeps me humble these days." They walked down the hall together, the three generals flanking the old man like a phalanx of honor. The crowd parted, pressing themselves against the walls, eyes wide, watching a living legend limp past. As they rounded the corner toward the elevators, Jeffrey paused. He looked back at the spot where the coffee had spilled. "Don't be too hard on the boy, Robert," Jeffrey said quietly. Vance looked at him, incredulous. "He assaulted you. He's young," Jeffrey said. "He's stupid. He has power and no wisdom. Give him the brig, sure. Strip his rank. But don't kick him out. Send him to me. To you. Send him to my farm," Jeffrey said, looking ahead. "Let him spend a month painting fences and listening to stories. Let him learn what that uniform actually costs. If he can survive a month with me, maybe he'll be worth wearing the marpet again." Vance smiled, shaking his head. "You're a better man than me, Jeffrey. Always were." "Not better," Jeffrey said, tapping his cane on the floor as the elevator doors opened. "Just older. And I know that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to turn an enemy into a believer." The doors closed, sealing the three generals and the old hero inside, leaving the hallway buzzing with the electricity of what had just happened. The legend of the man in the blue shirt would be told on that base for generations. The day the generals ran, the day the base locked down, the day a bully learned that true valor doesn't need a uniform to shine. In the weeks that followed, the base changed. The story spread like wildfire. "Did you hear about Warner?" They'd whisper in the chow hall. "Did you hear about Miller?" An official memo went out from General Vance's office. Mandatory training on military history and customs and courtesies for all ranks. But more than that, the culture shifted. Soldiers and Marines began to look at the civilians on base differently. They looked at the elderly volunteers at the hospital differently. They stopped assuming and started asking. And a month later, on a small farm just outside the base perimeter, a former corporal named Miller, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, was sweating in the sun, painting a white picket fence. He looked tired. He looked humbled. On the porch, sitting in a rocking chair with a glass of iced tea, sat Jeffrey Warner. He wore his blue shirt. He watched the young man work. "Missed a spot," Jeffrey called out, a twinkle in his eye. Miller stopped. He wiped his brow. He looked at the old man, not with anger, but with a profound, quiet respect. "Yes, Sergeant Major," Miller said. He dipped his brush and went back to work, grateful for the second chance, and grateful, finally, to be serving something bigger than himself. Like and subscribe for more stories of veteran valor.